Welcome back, Honors. Welcome back to your flip classroom, and we're gonna pick right up. Oh, hello. No, you can't have this. You can't have this. No, I'm sorry. No, sir, you're gonna need to calm down. You cannot have this. Okay, I stole this from the neighbor's garbage. Now, anyway, so the big thing about it though is welcome back to your flip classroom. That was Pierre right there, as you can tell. He's a very good boy. Sit. Yes, baby. Now, anyway, so we're going to pick up right now, starting off our brand new unit, right? Now, some of y'all are probably going to get a little bit confused out the gate because we're actually continuing the last unit for one significant flip and also for mainly one significant reason, okay? Because what we're about to talk about, that being the plague, anyway, when we talk about that, though, in general, you have to understand that, yes, that is happening in the late Middle Ages. And yes, we just wrapped up our Middle Ages unit, right? But we are starting this unit on the Renaissance and the Reformation off with the plague. Why would we do that, Mr. Terry? Why would we do that? I'm so confused. That's a great question, Katie Morrell. It's a fantastic question, okay? Why are we doing it? Because it's going to have significant effects on the progression of the Renaissance, right? Also, I hope all of y'all are having a happy Thanksgiving. You're going to have 2 of these flips over break, right? And we're also going to have a quiz when you get back. You should probably write that down. That's right, quiz on these 2 flips when you get back. Of course we are, right? Because that is going to be the nature of actually making sure that you studied your content, right? But getting into it, though, another big thing I'm going to promise to do is keep these flips under 25 minutes each. The second one, I think I might even keep at 15 or under, right? So the big thing about it, though, is let's start it off, right? The plague. You can have a separate section in your notes for the plague, or you can continue the Middle Ages stuff. It's really up to you. They're your notes. I don't care. All right, so now look. So the plague. The plague is a very, very important event in the progression of Western civilization's history because it's going to be a disease that destroys and rocks the very core and foundation of Europe and also most of the world because it was a pandemic, right? A pandemic is very... I'm sorry, do you have a question, sir? Do you have a question? Wow, Pierre, that was a really good, poignant question, right? We have dealt with a pandemic before. Look at Pierre activating his prior knowledge, right? And he's actually trying to say, oh, wait, isn't COVID and the plague kind of similar because they were both pandemics and stuff like that? Well, yes, Pierre, they are very, very similar. COVID was a pandemic that, of course, rocked our foundations recently in the last couple of years. But the other big thing that you need to understand is there is one key difference between the plague and that of COVID, right? And the big thing is that plague is a bacteria, right? The plague, a bacterium known as Yersinia pestis is what's going to be causing the plague, right? So the plague being caused by this bacteria that's rod-shaped and very gross is very different from the virus that caused COVID-19, right? COVID-19 was caused by a virus because they actually act in, actually interpret human cells and things like that in very, very distinctively different ways, right? So let's go ahead and focus in on that really quick. Let's talk epidemiology for a second, right? Viruses, the way that they spread is they actually get inside of your body. First and foremost, they're much smaller than bacteria, right? They're very, very tiny, like 10 microns in size. So viruses are very, very tiny, right? And they act more kind of like on their own skis, right? They actually get inside, the way COVID works, it got inside your lungs, matched up with the epithelial cells inside your lungs, right? So something you ought to know is that COVID viruses, they're covered in those little spike proteins, right? And those actually matched up perfectly to the cells that you have in your lungs. Your like cells would then go honk and then actually eat the virus itself, chop it up into thousands of little bits, and then it would actually grow, multiply, and incubate inside of your system. It then gets coughed out by your cells, and then actually ends up going off and squeak them, and then like actually coats your cell or like coats your inside of your lungs, convincing you to cough. You see, that's the key difference between a bacteria and a virus, is that viruses literally puppet your body. They actually puppet your body so they can get out and spread and infect a new host, right? Cholera is a similar, actually virus that actually needs to get into infected water so it can spread further, right? So another big thing that you need to understand, though, is bacteria is very, very different, right? And bacteria, the bacteria known as Yersinia pestis, cause the plague, right? It's very different because it actually has a very different nature, right? Actually, bacteria wants to get inside of the human body, also into any liquids or any other kind of thing that it can, so it can eat, grow, and multiply, right? So a big difference between bacteria and viruses, like I said, COVID-19 puppets your system, squeak them, cough, 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 so it can get out and further spread. Bacteria, on the other hand, just wants to live out its life cycle, eat, split, and grow and populate, right? Now that's a very, very interesting little thing though about it, because when you look at it is bacterial infections can be much worse if they go unchecked, right? Now the thing about it though is Mr. Terry has another big question. Do you think we've seen this thing before? Do you think we've seen the plague before? Have we seen the bacteria that causes the plague probably before, right? And actually, yeah, we have, right? We actually originally saw it in the 500s AD, right? In the Byzantine Empire under the Emperor Justinian, right? So the Emperor Justinian, who was actually living at the time with his wife Theodora in the Byzantine Empire and stuff like that. Thank you for all the high fives. I appreciate it. Y'all see these little high five paws right here? Yes, talk about the plague. Now, so the thing about it, though, is actually underneath Justinian's rule, the plague is going to break out. There's going to be an outbreak of the Yersinia pestis bacteria in the 500s AD, almost 1,000 years before it hit Europe and was known as the Black Death, right? So the thing about it, though, is that the Byzantine Empire and the Byzantinians were smart enough to know how to control it and try to keep it from decimating their entire population. Justinian himself actually even got it, and while he was sick, Theodora ruled in his stead, because she is a boss, right? So now, also, we think we might have seen this bacteria pop up before as well in Athens. However, most historians believe that the plague of Athens, the one that killed Pericles, y'all remember him, you remember Pericles, right? That whole thing, right? The guy who created those Odeons, Nickelodeons, Yanez, Xianya right there. The plague of Athens was probably just a flu. But some historians believe that it could have been an outbreak of Yersinia pestis, right? Now, the thing about it, though, that we need to understand and notice is then why was it so much worse in the 1300s in Europe during the Middle Ages than it was during the plague of Justinian, than it was during the possible plague of Athens and stuff like that? Well, a lot of it has to do with this idea known as urbanization, right? So Europe was just prime for the plague, right? It was the perfect setting for the plague to break out, right? So somebody probably in this room right now, in this flipped classroom, and this idea is probably wondering what the heck is urbanization, right? Well, urbanization is that word that I just said, okay? So write that down real quick. Urbanization. U-R-B-A-N-I-Z-A-T-I-O-N. Basically what it is the movement to towns and cities, right? That's what urbanization is. It's people coming from rural areas outside of the towns and cities and moving into the towns and cities. But of course, when we're looking at this from a historical perspective, we have to understand why. Why are they moving to towns and cities, right? It's very, very important, okay? So the big reason behind it has to do with advancements in technology, right? Something you need to understand is that the plow and the mill are going to have dramatic effects on the progression of agriculture during this time period, right? So the plow is a very, very simple device that actually kind of limited the need for so many people on a farm, okay? So like in the feudal era and in the feudal system, if I was the lord and all of y'all were my serfs and stuff like that, I would actually every single planting season have to give every single one of y'all a hoe. Okay, calm down over there. All right, so I give every single one of y'all that garden tool, and you would shift and turn the soil over, and then actually continue to cast and spread seeds, right? Well, the plow is going to actually limit it, so I only need one of you and an ox, right? So a lot of you are losing your job to a plow. And a lot of you are going to need to find work, so where are you going to go? The city, right? Another big one was the mill, right? The mill is going to actually make it so wheat can be ground much faster using water power rather than human power, right? And that's going to limit the need for so many workers out in the rural areas and stuff like that. So you're going to begin to move to cities to become artisans or traders or merchants or look for other streams of revenue, right? Towns and cities, though, are going to be surrounded by very large protective walls, so they filled up very quickly. And then the thing about it that you need to understand is that's going to lead to overcrowding, right? Overcrowding is going to lead to disease and disgusting city conditions. Because something to keep in mind is that these medieval cities that we're talking about, that right there is one of those defensive walls. They have very cramped, tight roads, very cramped quarters and stuff like that. And they weren't like, shout out Haley Ruther, the Romans with aqueducts and toilets and running water. They actually were disgusting areas that were full of sewage and nastiness, right? Because people literally would just add more floors onto their house because the city was limited in expansion by those walls. Some people moved outside the wall and stuff like that. Some newcomers would actually create small farms and areas outside the walls themselves, but a lot of places would actually add floors onto their homes and then rent them out and things like that. And so the problem is that this lady, whenever she goes to the bathroom right here, she has to go to the bathroom in a pot inside of her house called a chamber pot. And whenever she needs to get rid of the stuff inside said chamber pot, she pitches it out the window. So we've got human waste in the streets of these medieval towns and cities, and they're being heavily crowded because of that urbanization, right? So something else you need to understand, though, as well, is that we're going to see a massive famine that breaks out from 1315 to 1317, caused by a small ice age that came before it, right? So by 1300, most Europeans were farming almost every pot of land they could possibly find, right? So during the 1300s, there was an unusual, very nice warming period, right? There was a period of time in the early 1300s and coming off the late 1200s 1200s, where basically they were farming everything they could get their hands on, right? Because the climate was actually shifted in their direction. It was warmer, rain was more limited, frost was more limited, and so you had large growth of wheat and other crops that actually kept the population stable and alive. Well, what that's going to happen is people are going to live longer, they're going to starve less, and that means population's going to spike a little bit, right? Well, then all of a sudden, in the 1300s, the temperature begins to drop. And by about 1400 getting into it, is going to drop real bad, okay? So something that you need to understand is that climatological changes are going to hit Europe right around the year 1300, and they're going to begin to starkly decline, right? They're going to drop on average of about a half a degree Celsius for this entire time period. Some of you are like, that doesn't seem like that much. Well, it is that much when you're talking about flowering plants, right? Plants that actually have to go through a certain life cycle. Flower, reproduce, and then also create more like fruits, and vegetables for these people in Europe to eat, right? So these climatological changes are going to lead to what's known as the Little Ice Age. And the Little Ice Age literally lasted for hundreds of years. And we'll actually bring it up a little bit later on. It's going to cause a lot of disparity and a lot of different bad hardships that are actually going to go down throughout most of the progressive society. Now, some people are going to ask, like, well, how does that affect the Europeans in the early 1300s? Well, it's going to cause a heavy amount of rain, okay? And the rain is going to kill a lot of the wheat crops, and it's going to lead to a large famine that lasts for 2 straight years. Well, what happens when you don't eat very much because of this Little Ice Age? Well, you tend to starve, right? Like, so you're going to see a large population of poor people and peasants on a lot of different villages throughout Europe starve to death, right? And as many as 15% of peasants in some English villages are going to die from this thing, right? And one consequence of starvation and poverty, and also now the movement of people to towns and cities and overcrowding and things like that, is disease, right? So, like, the thing about it is you're not eating as much. Crops are not nearly as plentiful. You do not now have the immune system to fight off said diseases, right? Because remember, Justinian got it. Justinian got the plague, but then he lived through it, right? He actually lived through it and was able to fight it off due to the fact that he was better fed, had better medical techniques, and also wasn't an impoverished person in the 1300s that was starving to death because they didn't have any wheat because of a Little Ice Age, right? So the thing that you need to understand in general, though, is that this Little Ice Age and this famine is going to have massive consequences going forward, and it's just at the worst possible time, because about 30 years later, on the money, in 1347, the plague is gonna hit Europe, right? It's gonna hit Europe dead in the island of Sicily, all right? So the thing about it, though, something that you need to understand is we don't know, okay? First and foremost, we don't know where the plague came from. We don't know where this bacteria called Yersinia pestis, not a virus, where this bacteria came from or started. But we think it started somewhere in Eastern Europe / Western Asia / the Middle East / possibly in Northeastern Africa. We're not positive. A lot of historians believe it started somewhere in Asia, mainly just because the Asiatic people who were much more intelligent and had printing presses and stuff like that during this time period were the first people to report on it, right? Like, so now, like, the thing about it, though, is it's going to reach Europe in 1347 via a merchant ship. So something that you need to do really quick right now is highlight merchant ship, because merchants and traders are going to be the biggest people responsible for spreading this plague as it goes forward, okay? But I just want you to keep that in the back of your mind. But in 1347, a merchant ship is going to make landfall in Sicily, and on that boat, we have this person known as Patient Zero, right? Patient Zero for the European populations is the first person with plague to hit Europe and start spreading it, okay? Well, the thing about it is we believe that this person, or people possibly, came from a small city in Eastern Europe on the border of Turkey known as Kaffa, right? Now, Kaffa is like right over here towards the Black Sea, right? Now, this small city was attacked by a special group of people known as the Mongolians, right? The Mongolians attacked that city in the same year in 1347, and they're going to hit it hard, and they're going to hit it big, okay? And they're going to try to take it over. Well, a big tactic that Mongolians had when they were trying to take over cities during this time period is they would oftentimes throw dead bodies, dead carcasses, or dead things inside of cities. So we believe that on that siege in Kaffa, when they were attacked by the Mongolians, that they must have hucked a dead body into the city to try and spread disease and also cause more like chaos and stuff. And one of those bodies might have had that bacteria in it. It then would have gotten airborne. A person would have sucked it in. They would have literally then gotten to a boat, made their way to Sicily, And now the plague has officially hit Europe, right? And it's hit the worst possible place it can hit. It's hit a continent full of overcrowded cities, a continent full of starving people, a continent full of like climactic changes that they haven't gotten a handle on yet. And by 1347 to 1348, southern Europe is going to be infected with the plague. And by 1350, Central Europe and the British Isles is going to be fully hit, right? And again, why was it spread so quickly? Because remember, the High Middle Ages saw a return of trade, right? And with trade and the movement of boats and different things throughout the continent, you're going to see it spread very quickly. Now, a thing to keep in the back of your mind is just a very simple thing to understand, is that these boats are going all over Europe. These boats have cargo. That cargo attracts rats. Those rats have on them fleas, right? So the thing about it that you need to understand is most people who got the plague got what's known as bubonic plague, okay? Now, again, we're going into epidemiology a little bit right now. We're talking a little bit more about what you get, how you get it, and how the plague was spread, right? So the thing that you need to understand is that there's 3 different types of the plague you can get, right? Now, a lot of this is how you got it and also how the, like, symptoms begin to manifest themselves. Well, the most common one was known as bubonic plague, right? Bubonic plague came from infected fleas that was on those rats, that was on those boats, that was traveling around Europe during the 1300s, okay? Now, the bubonic plague that you need to understand, though, is coming off these infected fleas because the virus, or not the virus, excuse me, that's not correct, because the bacteria is inside the throat of the flea, right? The thing that it would end up happening is a flea would bite a rat that was infected with the plague, right, or a rodent of some kind. That bacteria would then get into the flea's throat and cause clotting throughout this entire area as the bacteria began to eat and grow and multiply. To get rid of this clog, whenever a flea bit its next victim, predominantly humans during this time period in Europe, they're going to then regurgitate or throw all that up, right? To try and relieve the blockage. So they really went and then threw up inside of you, and that's how you got the bubonic plague. You also could get it from handling dead animals or also from rat scratches, but it was most commonly spread through flea bites, right? The other one you could get was pneumonic plague. Sounds a lot like pneumonia because it relates to your lungs, right? So the pneumonic plague gets you when you inhale droplets of blood that contain plague bacteria, because someone who is infected with it is coughing or sneezing or and stuff like that, right? And they're spreading it all over the place. Now, this also, though, could be used as a weapon. Like I said, the Mongolians did use this and then would, like, huck dead plague people into other cities and stuff like that. Now, we also need to understand there's one last type of the plague, septicemic plague. Now, septicemic plague is the worst version of it. Now, septicemic plague is when your symptoms have advanced so badly to the point that you're going to die. And it's actually the one known as the Black Death more than anything else.
I don't know how
okay,
I got
so we're going to mute
this
guy, but just to give you an idea really quickly of what pneumonic plague, why it's so easy to spread, this is how much stuff comes out of your face whenever you sneeze, right? This is how much stuff. So this is why we need to cover our mouth when we cough. And this is why we can actually do a lot to stop the spread of disease by simply just avoiding these blood droplets. Because that stuff comes out of your face at 60 miles an hour. Did you see the big drops? Look at the big ones. Look at the, oh, gross. No, back it up a little bit more. Back it up a little bit more. Like, blah. That stuff would oftentimes contain blood and sometimes contain plague bacteria, which is how you got the pneumonic plague, right? Now, the next thing to understand as well is also, first of all, this is what septicemic plague looks like, okay? Septicemic plague is when you got this one very crucial, like, symptom of the plague. It's called lenticulation. Lenticulation would actually create dead necrotic flesh and then holes inside of your flesh that would actually lead to your eventual death, right? Septicemic plague have an almost 100% mortality rate. Septicemic plague would look kind of like this, and then sometimes your extremities, and that's lenticulation, where it would turn black. That's why it got the nickname the Black Death. Another common symptom of the plague as well, especially when it was progressing to septicemia, is this right here, a bulbous, right? A bulbous is when one of your lymph nodes gets infected and it begins to fill with pus and other different things from your immune system. And the biggest thing that they would usually do during this time period to a bulbous is they would lance it, right? Kind of like a Dr. Pimple Popper video. They would cut it open, which would also then help spread the plague even further because that lanced bulbous is full of plague bacteria. Now, the big thing about it, though, is that this entire disease is just going to rock the continent of Europe. It's going to rock them completely. You got people turning literally with black, dead, necrotic flesh spots, all of them, from septicemic plague. You got people coughing pneumonic plague all over the place. You got fleas biting people and literally throwing up bubonic plague into people. But you're also talking about a continent that actually is not up to date on medical science, not up to date on learning, not up to date on very, very large growths in academia, right? You got 4% of the people in this continent could read and write, okay? So there's going to be a lot of popular medical cures that pop up, right? Ones that didn't do anything to help stop the plague, but they still kind of existed, right? For example, the most common one that you've probably seen before is the pin that I wear on my jacket from time to time. It's the plague doctor, right? Doctors began to kind of wear strange costumes and kind of begin to like try and cover their bodies to prevent the spread of it to themselves. And the most common like version of this was of course that bird mask you've seen in like Beauty and the Beast and a couple of other things as well. The reason why it was shaped like that is because they would actually stuff herbs and flowers and things like that into it, so they didn't have to smell the dead bodies or didn't have to actually necessarily like actually come into direct contact with them. Now, another big one that became popular with poor people was bathing in human urine. They thought that actually coating themselves in human urine would actually help stop the spread of the plague, which I kind of understand a little bit. It's sterile, you know what I mean? It doesn't have anything in it. And there's a lot of ammonia, but it didn't do anything to help stop it, and it especially didn't do anything to stop it if you already had it, right? So, like, now, another big one was, like, rubbing onions and vinegar all over yourself was another popular medical cure that also, again, didn't really do anything to stop the plague from spreading. Bloodletting, of course, was the other really big one that was very common. Most doctors, whenever they came to you or when you went to them during this time period, would have a tool on them like this, where they would cut open one of your veins on your body and just leak blood out of you, right? Now, a lot of this is due to the fact that they're holding on to the old teachings of a philosopher named Galen, who thought if you had too much blood in your body, that's what caused illness, right? Which is not actually accurate whatsoever. Bathing in, oh wait, I have urine on there twice. Gross. Leeches was another very popular medical cure for the plague, but it didn't do anything as well. And if they reuse the same leech, you're just spreading it even worse. And another one that's really funny is rubbing chickens all over your body. That one was a really, really goofy one. They would actually pluck a chicken's butt and then tie it to the bulbous, thinking that that would be the thing that would actually cure the plague. And then also one was called unicorn horn, this powder that merchants would trade and stuff like that. But it actually didn't come from unicorns because unicorns aren't real. They think that if they came from any animal whatsoever, it might have came from narwhals, which are like whales with those long teeth that come out of their face and stuff like that. But, you know, who knows? All right, so now the big thing about it, though, is then, okay, Mr. Terry, if the plague is running rampant and people are going around dressed like birds and freaking out and rubbing chickens all over their body, how'd the plague actually finally end, right? What did it actually do? What also is going to stop this plague that causes your eyes to bleed? That's an actual, like, symptom of the plague, is your eyes would begin to bleed and stuff like that. Well, it's going to finally end eventually because of things like quarantine, right? Quarantine is self-isolation, which is a common practice that you got used to during COVID, right? The idea of putting yourself away from others and helping isolating the sick. Where it comes from is the Italian word quaranta, which means 40, because there actually began to be a standard towards the end of the plague where Italian port cities would say to all people that were coming in new on boats, you have to sit on that boat for 40 days, right? So we can make sure that you don't have the plague and you're not going to get anybody else sick, right? So that's another big one as well. Isolating infected people away from the uninfected. People were moving out of towns, right? This was typically wealthy people. They would move to country estates and stuff like that, getting out of the densely populated, overcrowded cities. Another one was hygiene. Just washing yourself more often was another way that the plague helped stop. Travel and migration also slowed down like significantly because trade is going to decline. And also periods without war, because for those of you that have been paying very close attention, hi PP, have been paying close attention, the 100 Years' War was going on during this time period, right? They actually had one of those long truces during the 100 Years' War when the plague actually hit them. And another one like the Pope and his fires, right? They actually learned that keeping a fire in your house was a good way to avoid getting the plague, and keeping several lit fires because the bacteria can't exist inside of heat that's that hot, right? A pope, actually Clement VII, would actually anoint the sick but inside of all these fires, and he never got sick. And it turned out because every time the bacteria would try to fly onto him, it'd just get burnt up in the flame, right? So like now, going into it though as well, you have to understand there's going to be massive effects of the plague on European society, right? Including things like an upsurge in faith and religion, artistic representation, economy, population decrease, and then also anti-Semitism, right? So the thing about it, though, is what we're going to do is we're going to stop right here, okay, for this first flip, and we're going to pick up on the effects of the plague in our next one, right? And we're going to carry it over into the Renaissance. But I'll see y'all soon. Y'all have a good one, and we'll talk about that one later, all right?